I'm Caroline Marks, 33 years old, and last month I showed up to my parents' annual business meeting ready to share news that could change everything. Instead, my mother offered me cinnamon rolls and a seat in the kitchen. I stood there holding my presentation folder while the others filed past into the conference room. Not one of them looked twice at me, not even my own father, not even my brother who'd used my research in his last quarterly pitch. It wasn't the first time they dismissed me, but it would be the last. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for your seat at the table, even when it was your own family's table. I was born into real estate. My father, Walter Marks, built his empire in Boston from a single storefront on Beacon Street. My mother, Linda, kept the books and balanced the charm. By the time I learned cursive, my older brother Daniel was already shadowing our dad through property walkthroughs, while Ryan, our youngest, floated between internships and golf tournaments, always landing softly. We lived in a large colonial off Commonwealth Avenue. Polished oak floors, carved banisters, a dining room long enough for 20. My father believed in discipline, my mother in appearances. They raised us to understand margins and maintenance schedules before we learned to drive. At dinner, the conversation was always business. I listened carefully even if they rarely asked for my opinion. I was the one who noticed patterns in the spreadsheets, the one who brought home blue ribbons and honor rolls. Still, I never quite belonged. Not in the way Daniel did with his tailored suits and power tie handshakes. Not in the way Ryan did with his easy charm and my parents' blind indulgence. I studied finance and systems at Carnegie Mellon, where I saw a different future. While my family clung to brochures and open houses, I built a prototype for a digital platform that let clients browse homes, virtually schedule walkthroughs online, close deals without ever printing a page. My father laughed. Real estate's about relationships, not screens. I didn't argue. I just started saving. I took on 3 jobs, lived in a studio so small I could touch both walls. I built my company on a secondhand laptop and microwave noodles. My assistant Monica came aboard when we couldn't pay her more than coffee and a shared dream. 4 years later, we were closing $200 million in digital transactions and expanding to new markets. Still, every year I showed up to that family meeting. I brought pie charts, insights, new tools. Every year they smiled, nodded, and moved on to Daniel's next big project. Last year, my father told me to email him the tech stuff. This year, I came with more than charts. I came with leverage. What I didn't expect was to be told again to sit in the kitchen. When my mother opened the door that morning, she barely masked her surprise. "Caroline, dear, we didn't think you'd make it. There's coffee in the kitchen. Inez made those cranberry scones you love." I glanced past her into the hall. The conference room doors stood open, rich mahogany, catching the morning light. I could already hear voices inside my father's Daniels, a few executives in tailored coats. My hand tightened around my leather folder. "I'm here for the meeting," I said. "Oh, honey." She adjusted her pearl necklace, avoiding my eyes. "The agenda is packed. But we'd love to hear what you're up to later." Maybe after lunch, Inez caught my eye from down the hall. She gave a small nod and opened the kitchen door without a word. My mother turned away. I stood in the foyer, surrounded by the familiar scent of cologne fresh polish and catered pastries. Nobody stopped. Not even Ryan, who brushed past with his phone in one hand, calling for someone to bring him an extra espresso. I walked into the kitchen. Marble counters, stainless appliances, high windows that caught the winter sun. The kitchen looked like a magazine cover, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about beauty. It was about boundaries. Inez placed a coffee mug beside me, her voice soft. "You shouldn't be in here, Miss Caroline." She said it not as judgment, but as truth. I opened my laptop. I had numbers to run, reports to finish, a call to take in 20 minutes. I didn't know it yet, but that call would be the moment everything began to change. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and fresh polish. Inez had left the coffee pot warm and placed a linen napkin under the plate of scones. I sat at the Marble Island laptop open portfolio to my right. Through the wide hallway, I could hear the muffled tones of my father's voice calling the meeting to order. Somewhere in that room, Daniel was probably already laying out projections, Ryan chiming in just enough to appear engaged. I had rehearsed my own presentation twice that morning. It sat unopened beside me. Inez passed quietly behind me, refilling the water glasses on a silver tray. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I'd grown up hearing the same silence. When my father took calls during my birthday dinners, when Daniel corrected me mid-sentence, when Ryan laughed and changed the subject, it was always the same quiet deferral dressed in warmth. A text lit up my phone. "Monica, can I call? It's urgent." I stepped away from the island and moved toward the kitchen window. The line rang once. "Caroline, sorry to bother you," she said, her voice lower than usual. "I know you're at your parents', but I need to tell you something before it hits the wires. What is it Henderson Properties is going up for sale? Full buyout. They're trying to keep it quiet." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "That's not possible. Frank Henderson swore he'd never sell. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, she said gently. His HR director is an old classmate. She called me directly. Henderson wants to transition before things move too far." I turned away from the hallway, away from the sound of voices in the boardroom. Why now? He's giving serious parties 48 hours, wants to avoid a media circus. If we're going to make a move, it has to be now. I leaned against the window frame and watched a bird settle onto the bare branch outside. The sky had turned gray. "Send me everything. Already in your inbox, and I've looped in legal and finance. If we do this, we need to act today." I hung up and returned to the island. Inez gave me a brief look before disappearing into the pantry. I opened my laptop again this time for something real. The numbers were sharper than expected. Henderson's books were clean. Their tech infrastructure stronger than ours in some ways, especially virtual tours. They held market share in the West Coast we had failed to crack. Monica's message popped up again. Estimated value $80 million. He might go down to $70 for the right buyer. We'd closed a $30 million funding round 2 months ago. Add cash reserves and we had $45 million liquid. We'd need financing for the rest. It wasn't impossible. From down the hall, a round of laughter rose. Daniel again, no doubt. I opened a new document. Began outlining integration points, licensing, staffing, infrastructure redundancies. As my fingers moved, I stopped hearing the sounds from the conference room. There was too much to calculate, too much to align. By the time I finished the first outline, Monica had already followed up. Spoke with Lewis and Chin. They'll review preliminary data tonight. Another message followed seconds later. If we go solo, we stretch our capital. If we partner with Mark's Real Estate, we get breathing room. You want to ask them? I stared at the screen. In the distance, my father was talking about quarterly gains. My brothers were probably trading jokes about someone's poor showing in the suburban market. A presentation I'd sent 2 weeks ago was likely sitting unread on someone's tablet. I typed back, "Let's build our offer first. I'll talk to them if it makes sense." The screen dimmed for a moment as a soft breeze tapped against the window pane. I closed the financial docs and gathered my things. It was time to stop listening from the hallway. I walked through the corridor, passing portraits and framed articles from my father's early days in the business, the same hallway where he taught Daniel to read site plans and where Ryan had learned to balance on the skates he wasn't supposed to wear indoors. I paused just outside the conference room. The mahogany table was full 12 people around it. My father at the head, Daniel to his right, Ryan to his left. Everyone looked up when I stepped in. "Caroline," my father said, sounding more surprised than annoyed. "Is something wrong?" I stepped forward. "I'd like to join the meeting." Silence stretched thin across the table. Linda, seated midway down, gave a small smile. "We're in the middle of the Patterson development update." "Perhaps I understand," I said, cutting in. "But I have an announcement I think the board should hear." Walter set his papers down. "We're following an agenda. You should have submitted something." I did. 2 weeks ago. I sent it to the admin office. I lifted my phone and displayed the email. The screen showed the subject line and timestamp. Thomas, the chairman, leaned forward. "Perhaps a short break is in order. Let's take 5. People stood. Chairs scraped. Coffee was poured. Walter approached me near the window. "This is not the time for your website updates." "That website handled $400 million in transactions last year," I said evenly. Daniel joined him, cup in hand. "Look, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we've got a process here." "Then let me give you something worth the interruption," I said. "Henderson Properties is for sale. Quietly. Limited window. I'm preparing an offer." That pulled them back. My father narrowed his eyes. Frank Henderson would have called me. He didn't. He called someone who mirrors the direction his company's been taking. Thomas re-entered the room, catching the tail end of the conversation. Caroline, if that's true, it's significant. I have financials, early valuation, retention terms. Our team is drafting the initial offer. I moved to the far screen and projected Monica's spreadsheet. Columns of clean numbers appeared across the room. I scanned their faces, some curious, some skeptical. Walter stepped closer. You're planning to buy a firm 3 times your size. I'm not just planning. I've begun structuring. Daniel crossed his arms. Even if the numbers hold, the risk is absurd. A few board members nodded in agreement. Walter glanced toward Thomas. Let's move back to the original agenda. I stood still. So that's it, I said. You won't even consider this. Walter turned to me. You want to be part of this company? Start at the bottom. Learn the structure. Otherwise, you're an outsider with a hobby. I gathered my folder. Thanks for clarifying. As I stepped out of the room, I heard Ryan behind me. Caroline, wait. But I didn't stop. Outside, the sky had darkened, but the cold air felt sharper than before. I started the car and watched the rearview mirror one last time before pulling away. The drive back downtown was just under half an hour. When I walked into our warehouse office, Monica was already waiting with 2 coffee mugs and a folder full of updates. We're set for 5:00, she said. But Derek and Lauren are in Conference B if you want a preliminary session now. I followed her past the exposed brick and work tables, past the teams that had carried this company forward when no one else would. Inside the room, our legal director and CFO were already reviewing the deal. Derek looked up first. We can make this work, but it'll be tight. Lauren nodded. Legally, it's clean. Structurally, they're solid. It's the financing that stretches us. We ran numbers until the hour passed. Then the leadership team filed in. Each gave input, risks, synergies, strategy. When the final charts were up, I leaned back in my chair and looked at the room. These people weren't nodding to be polite. They were building something with me. Still, as the room cleared, I stayed behind. Monica lingered by the door. Are we doing this? I hesitated. Then I nodded once. Schedule investor meetings, first thing in the morning. We're going in. I arrived at the office early the next morning. The air was still cold from the night, and the sidewalks glistened with a thin layer of frost. Inside, the lights were already on. Monica had set the boardroom exactly the way we discussed, folders at every seat, projection screens, warmed-up coffee, waiting at the sideboard. By 9:15, the investors began arriving. David Chin walked in first, nodding with polite warmth. Diane Blackwell followed, cool and precise, her sharp eyes scanning the layout. 2 partners from Horizon Capital came next, then representatives from 2 private equity groups I hadn't met before. At 10 sharp, I stood near the head of the table. I hadn't planned to open with anything scripted. Instead, I placed a single silver house key at the center of the table. This, I said, is what real estate has always been about. Not just buildings, not just land. It's about transitions. A key represents a beginning, an ending, a promise. I kept my hands folded in front of me. For decades, those transitions followed the same path. Paperwork, physical visits, broker-led tours. But the world has changed. Buyers begin online. They expect virtual previews. They want digital closings. I clicked the remote and brought up the first slide, side-by-side metrics. Our growth, Henderson's market position, industry trends over 5 years. I moved slowly through the pitch, showing where our platforms aligned, how our predictive tools could integrate with their immersive experiences. Henderson held strong on the West Coast. We dominated the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Together we could create something that didn't just compete, it led. When I finished the presentation, I paused. For a moment, no one spoke. Then David Chin leaned forward. Strong numbers, clean strategy. But the financing gap is wide. How do you plan to close it? I nodded. We're proposing a hybrid structure. Preferred equity with milestone-based disbursement. Earn-out terms tied to executive retention. Integration phases that reduce risk across the board. Diane tapped her pen twice. You're proposing to acquire a company 3 times your size. That's ambitious. What makes you confident in the integration? We've mapped the timeline. 18 months, 3 distinct phases. Our CTO has already begun back-end analysis of platform overlap. We're not absorbing overnight, we're aligning carefully. She looked at the chart, then at me. And your team? I didn't hesitate. Every department head is on board. This isn't just my idea, it's our strategy. The questions continued for over an hour. Technical due diligence, market cannibalization, team overlap. I answered each one directly, keeping the focus on execution. No emotion, no personal stakes. By the time they stood to leave, I had no clear read on what direction they were leaning. David paused at the door. You'll hear from us before the day's out. Monica closed the door gently behind them. I sat down and finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The next 5 hours passed in fragments. Horizon Capital declined too concentrated in the space already. One of the private equity groups wanted to see more back-end technicals. Monica relayed each update as it came in. At 4:17, her screen flashed. She stepped quietly into my office and handed me her tablet. Venture Partners had committed, contingent on one additional co-lead. At 5:45, Lewis Partners confirmed participation. The second private equity group offered a minority role. Monica stood in the doorway. We have the financing. I nodded. Then we move. For the next 12 hours, the office barely slept. Legal began drafting acquisition terms. Finance finalized capital structures. Our systems team started compatibility maps. At 6:00 a.m., we submitted our formal expression of interest to Henderson's executive board. By 9, Alicia Henderson's head of HR confirmed receipt. They were reviewing all offers. Decisions would be made within 24 hours. That evening, I paced in my office watching the skyline dim. Monica entered quietly. They're scheduling meetings with finalists. Frank Henderson wants to speak to each team directly. I looked over at her. In person? She nodded. Tomorrow, San Francisco. Book the flight. She hesitated. You should take someone. I was going to. I watched her set the folder on the desk. Her brow lifted slightly. You. She blinked. Me. You've been at my side since we were 2 desks and a coffee pot. You've earned this. We landed the next morning just before noon. A driver met us at the airport and took us straight to Henderson's headquarters. Their building overlooked the bay glass walls, open floor plan, minimal signage. No marble, no legacy portraits. Just screens displaying market trends and virtual walkthroughs in progress. Frank Henderson met us in a small glass-walled room with a long oak table and a view of the water. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his handshake was steady. I've watched your company, he said as we sat. I've seen how you move. He didn't waste time. You're not the only bidder, he said plainly, but your offer is the most aligned with our values. He slid a packet across the table. These are my counter terms. Price stays at 75, but I want assurances on staff retention, and I want the culture preserved. I opened the folder and scanned the pages. The changes were firm but reasonable. We could meet them. We accept, I said quietly. Frank leaned back in his chair. Your family. Are they involved? I met his gaze. Not in this. He nodded once. You're building something separate. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, we signed the preliminary agreements. By the time our plane touched down in Boston, the story had broken. Headlines named the acquisition one of the most significant in the industry in over a decade. Tech platforms, regional consolidation, generational shift. That night, as I sat in my office, messages poured in. Investors, peers, even 2 former professors. The only name missing was my father's. Until it wasn't. Just after 10, my phone rang. His name lit the screen. Congratulations, he said. It's impressive. There was a pause. Maybe we should talk about what this might mean between your company and ours. I looked down at the key still sitting on my desk. Maybe we should, I said. The morning after the news broke, I arrived at the office just after 6. The lights were still off in most departments, but Monica had already beaten me in. A fresh pot of coffee was brewing. Investor calls had poured in overnight. Our legal team confirmed the signed agreements. The Henderson acquisition was official. I stood for a moment in the empty boardroom, watching the sun rise through the windows that faced the harbor. The skyline looked different now, brighter somehow. But there was no time to dwell. Integration planning began today. At 10 sharp, I stepped into the main conference room. Every department head was there. Screens displayed projections maps and staffing models. Monica led with logistics. Derek followed with finance. Gabriella outlined early communication strategies. Each person came prepared with timelines, caution points, and priorities. By noon, we had assigned task forces and open channels with Henderson's transition team. Raj, our CTO, set up a technical sync with their VR division. Marcus was already working on office coordination. Everyone knew what was ahead. At 3:30, my phone rang. It was my father. "I'd like to speak in person," he said. "Are you free this weekend?" I hesitated. "Sunday afternoon. I'll come to your office," he replied. When Sunday came, I wasn't sure what to expect. He hadn't visited our space since we opened in the old warehouse. Now we had moved. Our new offices were in the financial district, tall ceilings, glass panels, sleek conference rooms. He arrived right on time. Monica buzzed him in, then quietly stepped out of sight. My father looked around as he entered, pausing by the wall of team photos we'd hung just last week. "This is impressive," he said, his voice measured. "Quite a step up." I motioned for him to sit. "Coffee?" "No, thank you," he said. "I won't stay long." He leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the polished edge of the table. I spoke with several board members. They're curious how this deal might affect the market perception of Mitchell Real Estate. I waited. "I also spoke with Frank Henderson," he added. "He mentioned your terms were focused on culture preservation." That surprised me. "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I want to be clear. I disagreed with how you went about this, but the outcome is significant. It shifted things." "Are you saying congratulations?" I asked carefully. "I'm saying I underestimated what you were building, and now we're in a new place." There was a pause. "Our board is meeting Thursday to discuss digital transformation. Your insights would be useful." I studied his face. There was no apology, but there was something quieter, something closer to respect. "I'll come," I said, "but as the CEO of my company, not as a guest of yours." He nodded. "Understood." When Thursday arrived, I arrived 15 minutes early. The receptionist, who'd known me since I was a teenager, blinked when she saw my name on the agenda. "Miss Marks," she said. "You're here for the board meeting." I nodded. "I'm listed as a participant." "Yes, of course. Let me walk you in." The walk through the familiar halls felt different. Monitors now displayed property listings. A virtual tour station had been added near the reception. Small changes, but ones that hadn't existed a month ago. Inside the conference room, the same mahogany table stood at the center. Same chairs. Many of the same faces. But as I stepped in, my father stood from his seat at the head. "Caroline," he said, gesturing to the seat beside him. "Thank you for joining." Daniel sat across from me. His eyes tracked every movement. Ryan gave a quick nod and looked down. The meeting began. My father gave brief opening remarks, then turned to me. "I'd like to begin with Caroline's perspective on client expectations in a changing market." I pulled up my slides. One by one, I laid out the shifts we'd observed: buyer behavior, transaction speed, tech touchpoints. I kept my tone steady. Just data, just facts. I made no mention of Henderson, no mention of past dismissals. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then one of the board members asked a question. Another jotted a note. Someone asked if I could send over the slides. When the conversation shifted to the Patterson project, I offered suggestions on improving the digital rollout. Last time, they'd barely heard me speak. Now they were asking for specifics. When the meeting ended, my mother approached me near the window. "You did well," she said. The board was impressed. "I've shared those strategies before," I said. She gave a small smile. "Yes, well, sometimes it takes time to recognize value." She touched my arm. "Your father reserved a table at Morton's. Would you join us for lunch?" I hesitated. "I can stay for an hour," I said. "Then I have to get back downtown." Lunch was quiet at first. The private dining room hadn't changed. Same navy napkins, same silver candle holders. My father ordered for the table. My mother asked about the new office. Halfway through, Daniel broke the pattern. "How's the West Coast team integrating?" he asked. I glanced up. Better than projected. "Their VR infrastructure is tighter than ours, but our predictive tools are stronger." He nodded. "That'll be a good combination. If you ever need cross-regional insight, I've worked with some of their commercial clients before. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't resistance either." As dessert arrived, my father cleared his throat. "We've discussed possible collaboration between the two firms. Nothing formal yet, but there may be opportunities." I didn't react. "If you're open," he continued, "we'd welcome a preliminary proposal." I folded my napkin. "I'll ask my team to draft one." After lunch, Ryan walked me to my car. "What you did," he said, "it wasn't just smart, it was bold. I've tried pushing for digital tools for 2 years. It always got shelved." "It's harder from inside," I said. He looked at me. "Would you meet next week? I've been working on a few ideas." I unlocked the door. "Send me a time." As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced once in the mirror. My father stood near the entrance talking to a valet. My mother adjusted her coat beside him. Daniel was already inside. But Ryan, he watched the car until I turned the corner. The week after lunch with my parents moved quickly. Our integration with Henderson was reaching its first milestone, and departments were adjusting faster than expected. Monica coordinated daily updates, and each team submitted weekly reports. The combined structure was starting to take shape, one that felt cohesive, not forced. On Thursday morning, Ryan stopped by our downtown office. He arrived early carrying 2 coffees and a folder. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me, as we sat in the smaller conference room, about how it's harder to push change from inside. He opened the folder and slid it toward me. Inside were notes on property management automation paired with a basic outline of a client-side interface. "I started this last year," he said. "Never got past the sketch stage. Dad thought it was unnecessary. I scanned the layout. The idea had potential. Not fully developed yet, but enough to warrant a follow-up. You working on this alone?" I asked. He nodded. I figured it'd be dismissed either way. "Then let's test it," I said. "Build a prototype. Use dummy data. If it holds, I'll walk it into our beta group." His eyebrows lifted. "You'd do that?" I nodded. "But I'm not handing it to you. You'll lead it with support." He leaned back in his chair. "Okay, let's do it." By the next week, Ryan had a desk in our operations pod. It wasn't permanent yet, just a test run, but the energy shift was immediate. He asked smart questions, stayed late, and met Monica's deadlines. My grandfather called a few days later. He wanted to stop by. He hadn't visited our new space since we moved from the warehouse. I wasn't sure he would, given how little he left the house these days. But that Friday just before noon, he stepped off the elevator, leaning on a cane, eyes sharp as ever. "This place has changed," he said, taking in the open floor plan. "Looks like something out of a magazine." I led him into my office where we kept a chair just for him. He sat slowly glancing at the framed articles and charts on the wall. "You've come a long way from that apartment over the bakery," he said with a grin. I smiled. "Still remember the smell of fresh bagels every morning. I remember you working on a folding table trying to convince people the internet would matter in real estate." He paused. "You were right." He looked down at his hands. The skin was thinner now, but still steady. "Your father's proud," he added. "He may not say it often, but he is." "He's coming around," I said. "Ryan, too." I saw that he nodded. That boy always had ideas, just needed someone to believe in them. He stood after a while, resting one hand on the edge of the desk. "Don't lose that edge, Caroline. You see things the rest of us miss. That's not something you learn, it's something you carry." He waved off my offer to walk him down. "I'll make it. Elevator still works." After he left, I stood at the window for a long time looking out at the skyline. The office buzzed behind me, phones ringing quiet conversations, the hum of focused energy. That evening, Monica brought in a printed draft. "It's the outline you asked for," she said. "Preliminary collaboration proposal for your father's team. Clean format, flexible structure." I read through it line by line. The terms were measured shared tech integration on 2 developments with staggered rollout and separate reporting. Nothing risky, nothing rushed. Send it to his office, I said. Let's see how they respond. 2 days later, Diane from my father's team called. She wanted to schedule a preliminary discussion. She asked if we'd host. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived early. Our team had set up the main conference room clean and simple. Monica reviewed the agenda. Raj and Derek were ready. At 10, the Mitchell real estate team stepped off the elevator. My father led, followed by Diane Daniel and 2 project managers I hadn't seen in years. Everyone exchanged greetings quietly. There were no grand statements, no awkward handshakes. The meeting ran just over an hour. We walked them through the outline. They asked for clarification on the rollout timeline and flagged a few concerns about support structure. But they listened. When it ended, my father stood and extended his hand. We'll review this with the board, but it's a strong foundation. Later that afternoon, Ryan knocked lightly on my door. We're live, he said. Prototype's up. Gabriella wants to run it through client services next week. I looked at the clock. You want to go see it in action? He grinned. Absolutely. We walked down to the tech bay where his team had set up a demo station. The interface was still rough around the edges, but the logic held. Clients could manage listings documents and schedule viewings in one place. Gabriella tapped a few screens. This could fill a real gap in our mid-tier clients. It's clean, practical. Ryan kept his hands in his pockets, but couldn't quite hide the smile. That night, as the last few employees left for the evening, I paused near the entryway. The office had quieted. Most desks were dark, but the framed key from our investor presentation still hung on the wall near the door. It was a simple reminder of what we'd built, of where we started. 2 weeks after the initial collaboration meeting, we signed the pilot agreement. It covered 2 developments, one from each company allowing us to test integration tools and process alignment without overextending either team. The contract was measured, intentional. Something my father and I both understood. We scheduled the first joint review for early spring. In the meantime, the Henderson acquisition was entering its next phase. Systems had migrated successfully. Teams were now cross-training. Gabriella's group had finished messaging for clients, and Derek's reporting dashboards showed steady growth across key regions. I met Ryan in the tech suite one afternoon as he finalized the second version of his client interface. Gabriella wants to start pitching this with the summer listings, he said, tapping through screens. She thinks it'll help differentiate us in the mid-market. I watched the dashboard load. She's right, I said. This is ready. He looked up almost surprised. Even with the bugs, you'll fix them, I said. Besides, nothing rolls out perfect. It rolls out strong and gets better. Ryan smiled. Thanks for letting me build this here. I nodded. You earned it. That Friday, Monica brought in the quarterly results packet. Marked up versions in your inbox, she said. And I flagged something unusual. I scanned the top sheet. One column stood out listing overlap between our platform and a new outside firm. Not significant yet, but the growth was sharp. West Coast high-tech branding premium leads. What's the firm, I asked? Monica flipped her tablet. Clear Ridge Realty. Founded 7 months ago. Heavy digital interface. Their design style is familiar. I tapped through their site. Modern layout, AI-based suggestions, virtual previews, property scorecards. Too many features mirrored our own. Who's behind it, I asked. She paused. Jason Marks, registered in Nevada but incorporated in Boston 3 weeks ago. I stared at the screen. Where's their office? Cambridge, she said. 2 floors leased under a holding company. But we verified the layout with a property manager. Jason's listed as managing director. I closed the tablet and set it on my desk. Pull his filings and check if he's approached any of our vendors or contractors. Monica nodded. On it. By Monday, the picture had sharpened. Jason had poached a former engineer from our platform team, one we'd let go during early startup days. His product language was lifted almost word for word from our early sales sheets. And 3 potential clients had recently delayed contracts after taking meetings with Clear Ridge. At the Wednesday board sync with Mitchell Real Estate, I joined virtually. I waited until the formal updates were complete. Then I asked, can we speak briefly about a conflict of interest? My father glanced toward the camera. What kind of conflict? Jason has launched a competing real estate technology firm using proprietary methods we developed at Mitchell Tech. The overlap in markets and branding is now affecting our client traction. Silence followed. Daniel shifted in his chair. Jason, seated just out of frame, leaned in. It's not a conflict. I'm not part of your company. I never signed anything. You used access to early family meeting materials to inform your pitch, I said. You've leveraged client connections from Mitchell Real Estate and mimicked our proprietary interface. My father cut in. Is this confirmed? Yes, I said. And if this continues, we will be forced to act legally and publicly. Jason folded his arms. You've always wanted to be the only one succeeding. I didn't respond. The screen stayed quiet. No one defended him. My father finally spoke. We'll review the matter internally. You'll hear back from Diane within the week. After the call, I stepped into the hallway. Ryan stood just outside holding a report folder. I didn't know, he said quietly. I believe you. He opened the folder, then closed it again. I want to stay with you. Whatever happens next, I don't want to go backward. I nodded. Then stay focused. We build forward. That night, I met Monica in the strategy room. She laid out 2 plans, legal response if needed, and a brand defense campaign to safeguard our client base. We're ready, she said. I looked at the Henderson transition wall across from us. Pins, notes, market heat maps. We hadn't come this far to be pulled off course. Then let's protect what we've built. As I left for the evening, the framed key caught my eye. Still there, still simple, still the reason we'd started. The legal packet arrived on a Monday morning. Monica placed it on my desk, clipped and tabbed. At the top was a letter from our counsel outlining the full case against Clear Ridge Realty. Trademark infringement, breach of intellectual property, unfair business practices. Jason had not responded to our request for a meeting. His team had gone quiet. Instead, we started hearing from clients 3 more had delayed onboarding. 1 redirected their contract to Clear Ridge entirely. Monica waited for my response. I flipped through the file again, then handed it back. Have Nora file it. She nodded once. We'll serve him this afternoon. By the end of the day, the filing hit trade outlets. An article on Realtech News cited unnamed sources and included screenshots comparing the 2 platforms. The headline didn't mention Jason by name, but the body did. So did the pull quotes. That night my phone rang. It was Daniel. You're really doing this? He asked. I am. You know what it's going to look like, I do, I said. And I also know what he did. He was quiet for a moment. Dad wants to call a board session. Separate from the collaboration. Just us. Tell him to send the time. We met 2 days later at the Mitchell Real Estate Conference Room. Just my father, Daniel Ryan, and me. No assistants, no advisors. My father sat at the head of the table, fingers pressed together. We've reviewed the claims he began. The evidence is strong. We're not disputing that. I waited. But this is going to bring press we don't want, he continued. Bad attention, family and public conflict. He started the conflict. Ryan said surprising everyone. Caroline's just defending what she built. My father looked at him but didn't argue. We're not here to ask you to drop the case, Daniel said. We're here to ask what it'll take to settle before trial. Monica had already prepared the terms. Full cease and desist, transfer of proprietary assets, a public statement retracting false claims. And Jason, my father asked. He's not my concern anymore, I said. But if he wants to remain in this industry, he needs to learn what boundaries are. Later that evening, Ryan found me in the back stairwell of the building. He leaned on the railing, staring at the city lights. I didn't know I'd say anything back there, he said. It helped. He looked over at me. Do you think it'll ever be normal again? I thought about it. About Sunday dinners, old roles, birthday speeches. Then I shook my head. I think it'll be different. And maybe that's okay. 2 weeks passed before Jason signed the agreement. The public statement came first, brief, scripted, but firm. Then the transfer of assets. Then the shutdown notice on Clear Ridge's site. The day it went offline, I didn't speak to anyone about it. I didn't bring it up in meetings or reference it in investor calls. I simply walked into my office, looked at the framed key near the door, and kept going. That Friday, my father called. The board has finalized the partnership framework, he said. We want you to take point on the Joint Platform Initiative. You're asking Mitchell Tech to lead. I'm asking you, he replied. I said I'd think about it over the weekend. That Sunday, I drove to Brookline. My grandfather was sitting in the sunroom with a folded paper in his lap and a glass of iced tea nearby. He looked up when I entered, one eyebrow raised. You've had a month, he said. And quite a month it's been. I need your take. You already have your answer, he replied. You came here for confirmation. I smiled. He reached over, patted my hand once. Take the lead, Caroline. You've earned it. I accepted the leadership role on the new joint platform the following week. Our teams came together, some from my company, some from Mitchell Real Estate, each bringing a different skill set and a different kind of pride. The project meeting started off cautious, but as the days turned to weeks, the tension faded. We learned each other's rhythms. Even Daniel, who had once barely looked up when I spoke, began seeking out my thoughts before finalizing decisions. Ryan thrived in his new position, his pilot tool for client services quickly moving from beta to company standard. My father visited our offices more often, never with the old distance. Sometimes he'd stop just to ask about a project or to share an idea he'd read about. My mother sent over a lemon pound cake for the team one Friday, her way of saying she was proud without ever putting it into words. Monica, whose loyalty and grit had helped build every brick of this place, was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. She brought a bouquet of wildflowers to my desk that day and left them in a chipped glass she found in the break room. For all the new beginnings, she said. The collaboration with Mitchell Real Estate became the backbone of our most successful year. Revenue grew, yes, but something deeper settled in a sense of mutual respect. The old patterns, the closed doors, and polite dismissals faded away. There were still disagreements, still moments when I remembered what it was like to wait in the kitchen instead of the boardroom. But now I saw those moments for what they were, a step on the road, not the end of it. On the one-year anniversary of the Henderson acquisition, I walked into our conference room, carrying the old silver house key that had started it all. I placed it on the table, just as I had during my first investor meeting. Everyone in the room understood. Sometimes the doors that stay closed the longest are the ones that matter most when you finally open them yourself. After the meeting, I sat by the window overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun turned everything gold. I thought about how easy it is to measure your worth by someone else's yardstick, how long I'd waited for recognition from my own family, and how in the end, the only approval I really needed was my own. The journey hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been quick, but I learned that dignity is built one steady choice at a time. Justice isn't always a grand event. Sometimes it's the quiet moment when you realize you've built something lasting, something no one can take from you. If you're listening now, maybe you know what it's like to fight for a seat at the table or to have to build a new one from scratch. I hope you'll remember the doors that close on you can become the walls that hold up your next home. Thank you for letting me share my story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll share your own or pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. Take care.